Rasmus Kupari is out and off to the great lands of Switzerland. Is his departure the first sign that the Summer of Chevy is about to begin?
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. More than anything, though, we just love and appreciate your continued support. Now, last episode, we spent time talking about the very hidden prospects in Winnipeg's system, right? Obviously, the past couple of shows, we have focused really on Winnipeg's future because I think that that's what a lot of folks are starting to consider, especially for not only the present, but maybe a little bit further out. You know, the Jets are kind of in a transitional state, and I think that that presents some very interesting opportunities for this team and also some potential pitfalls. But I choose to look at this on the optimistic side. I think that Winnipeg, while there's a lot that could go wrong here, this might also be a time for them to philosophically change how they approach building this team. And so for that reason, I kind of want to look at the happiest parts, right? And think about where the Jets could go from here. This team has already gotten close twice now and tasted some really good playoff success, but they need to go back to really looking at the youth and making use of what they have internally to try and improve this team, and then supplementing that with outside help. The first sign that maybe all of this is about to happen is that Rasmus Kupari is off to Switzerland. Now, in isolation, I don't think Kupari's departure is this earth-shattering revelation. There are some questions that I had about what happened to him after his concussion, and so we never really got an answer. He would show up at practice sometimes. Other times he'd go back into what appeared to be concussion protocol. We were never really sure. Well, now he signed for 2 years, I think with Lugano or something, if I recall correctly. And great for him. Glad he can find a spot. I think if I look back on the Kupari era, it was very fast, and that was kind of it. Obviously, he did take a bit of a step forward under Arniel, but I wouldn't say it was to the degree where a lot of people were like really hyped about Rasmus. And I just thought he was a fine fourth liner. That's kind of the vibe that I got. I don't know how he ever got played as a center because I kind of feel like he was more of a winger. But, it is what it is. Kupari, I think we will thank him for his service. But the Jets kind of need more from their players. And that's sort of where this departure is intriguing to me. Now, I don't know that Kupari necessarily changes what the Jets are going to do with his spot specifically, but if he becomes the first in maybe a couple of departures, maybe this is the sign of things changing with the Jets. I've talked about how I looked at their draft the past couple of seasons, and I felt that they've maybe identified some key profiles that they have liked, right? Some guys that they've really gone for. And these players are guys like Kevin He. I think you could argue somebody, well, maybe not so much Barlow, but Walton has, quite a bit of offensive upside and is pretty relentless. He is also kind of that really high motor player. Chibrikov sort of fits into this mold. And so with all of this in mind, and with all of these guys having improving skating and much higher top-end speed, it makes me feel like the Jets understand that their future needs to really follow more of a Colorado model. If Kupari going is kind of the first sign that the Jets are trying to maybe swap out some of the guys who are perhaps not offering as much given their ice time to something that's more offensively prolific, maybe a player who can add an extra layer of skill, I am all for that. Now, if it means that they're trying to sign and bring in a Jonathan Taves, I'm a little bit less interested in that. I know a lot of you are probably on the same boat here where our mindset is that this team needs to get younger and faster. Adding an old guy to your fourth line maybe doesn't hurt you, but I don't really feel like a dude who hasn't played in like 2 or 3 years also really helps. Yes, you can argue that there's the whole veterancy thing, but we already had that with Luke Schenn. And Schenn really didn't do much that I would say the Jets were missing other than hit guys really hard. And while that was fun, Winnipeg's back end puck movement and blue line mobility really took a hit while he was playing because he ended up benching Colin Miller. And so for Winnipeg, this is kind of a pivotal moment where I feel like they need to look at what went well in the postseason and in the regular season and learn the right lessons. And if Kupari is the first sign that they're trying to maybe get more efficient, maybe cut down and sort of trim down on roster spots that haven't always given them enough back, this could be a big deal. I also want to look at the Mason Appleton thing because if Appleton also goes, that for me would be the biggest sign that the Jets are ready for a future-looking squad. Now, I don't know that that means that they're going to have nothing but children occupying these spots. I don't think I'm ready to go there just yet, but I do feel like Winnipeg, at least in the interim, is thinking about how to transition to the next phase of this team. And if that means that they're going to start making some harder choices with their free agents, I'm very supportive of that. The Ehlers one obviously is going to hurt a lot, and I'm not sure I'm really on board with that so much, but the Jets cutting ties with Kupari, very likely Mason Appleton. I'd imagine, Brandon Tanev's probably not coming back. I could see this being a sign that things are going to change, hopefully for the better. Now, I do wonder if the Jets are really committed to that or if Kupari really wanted to force his way out and just go overseas anyways. But, either way, regardless of what happens, my feeling is that kind of reducing some of the guys who, I don't want to call them dead weight, but maybe didn't pull their weight to the degree that I think the Jets really need from this team, it can only help the Jets start to get a little leaner and a little faster going forward. Again, Kupari, I think, had a lot of top-end speed and stuff, but what he did with that, I think, is where I usually had some really big questions about, the talent level there. I can kind of see why the Kings weren't really hot to trot to keep him. So for what it's worth, I think the Jets probably got the best version of Kupari that we've ever seen, and that's really all that you can say about that. Now, as far as whether or not, again, this is the beginning of the Summer of Chevy, I don't want to get that excited just yet. I think the Appleton move is going to be a much bigger thing. If Appleton gets extended, I have very big concerns about what happens with the rest of the offseason because to me, that will signal that the Jets don't understand why this team struggled and what they need to do to improve the team. And I don't mean to use one player as sort of a bellwether, but with Appleton's, deployments, his over reliance at 5v5, and how the Jets are constructed, Winnipeg just doesn't have a lot of margin for error. And I think that that's kind of a thing that's been a recurring theme with the squad. And so Appleton, Kupari, guys like these, you need to find ways to get that 5 to 10% better, and they're not going to do it for you. This is where you have to lean on some of your youth. And I want to talk a little bit in just a moment about the potential youth movement here, because I think the Jets are going to be forced into it in some ways, and in others, Winnipeg also has a chance to add some veteran talent that's still good. I don't think you want to completely walk away from players who have a good deal of experience just because they're on the older side, but you want to add the right kind of experience. And that's where I think the Jets in the past have maybe struggled. I'm hoping this coming summer, and again, it's a little bit of coping, but I'm hoping this is when they finally make this shift to something a little more sustainable. We'll chat about the marriage of old and new in just a quick moment. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, right? You're looking for a snack that's delicious and nutritious? Well, you can crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. And they're packed with fiber and better-for-you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. Now, as a Marylander, I always go with the shelled variety. It's just a thing. We like to crack open crabs, and a shelled pistachio is kind of like a mini crab. You get a little bit of protein inside. It's a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids, and it is always delicious. But maybe you need something that's a little more convenient, something as you're dropping your kids off at school, a thing to bust your 3 p.m. Afternoon work slump. Whatever it is, they've got great flavors, and it comes in a no-shelled variety, so it takes out all the stress. You just pop them in, and you are good to go. So get snackin' and get crackin' with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are talking a little bit about the marriage of old and new with this Jets team. Winnipeg is kind of at a transition point in the franchise's history that I'm not really sure that they've ever been before. We've had guys who have forced their way off teams, and, that's always been tough because it forced, Chevy to really work his trade magic. And somehow, almost every one of these deals has ended up being a win for the Jets in some capacity. The McGroarty trade, you could still argue, is kind of to be determined a little bit, but I think Brayden Yager, and you notice I've got a moment to talk about him later this episode, I think he fits what the Jets need a little bit better than Rucker does. But when you look at what this offseason is going to be, we have a lot of guys who are likely walking in free agency, some of them who have been here for a very long time, and some of them who are key contributors in a lot of ways. Ehlers, Appleton, guys like that walking is pretty unusual for Winnipeg. You don't really see the Jets do stuff like this. When they cut ties, it's usually with players that they don't really feel that strongly attached to. Nate Schmidt obviously had to get bought out. Blake Wheeler kind of burned his bridges with the locker room and stuff, and they had to strip him of the captaincy. And so that exit was pretty bittersweet. But this year, I feel like the Jets are kind of opening up a fair number of roster spots, and it's time for them to actually use some of the kids. And I say this because, you look at a lot of other teams, Dallas and Florida and some of these other squads have been very aggressive in the trade market, and that's not really been Winnipeg's position. The Jets just don't do this stuff. They're not going for a Rantanen. They're not making a power play for a Matthew Tkachuk. That's not Winnipeg's approach. And so if the Jets are this reluctant to trade big assets, then use them, play them, give them real ice time, and let them earn their way at the NHL level. I think the Jets have really been reluctant to do so because they feel like it compromises their competitiveness. But where I look at it, I see the Jets needing to do this in order to become more competitive. The Jets can't keep relying on the same group of players year in and year out with some small tweaks to get them to the promised land. They've tried it too many times. I think this was their best chance to do it, and it still came up short. Now, you can argue that there were some unlucky moments against the Stars, but then look what happened to Dallas right after the Jets series. Edmonton, frankly, took them behind the shed and beat the absolute stuffing out of them after that Game 1 loss. So if the Jets were in the same position, can we really say that would have been any different? I personally don't think so. I think the Jets probably would have lost that series. I don't think we'd see Winnipeg going to the Stanley Cup Finals. And so it really begs the question, how does the team move on from this? How do you learn from this moment and build a better and brighter team? And I think next year could be a tough lesson for the Jets, but I'm really hoping that this is the year that they finally bring in those ELCs and start to lean on them. Look, you're going to have a transition season that I thought was supposed to be last year with more kids, more youth talent, and more uncertainty. The Jets don't even know what their 2C situation is yet, right? They haven't made that trade. I don't know if they're going to before the draft. I would think that they go for it. I would have to imagine that they're trying to bring in somebody because Lowry's injury and rehab, look, it might be done and resolved towards a couple of weeks into the start of the season, but we don't know what his hips are going to be like after the surgery, right? Even after all the rehab, he may never be the same player. That is how difficult hip surgeries can be. So the Jets have immediate needs for help down the middle. They're already losing a center in Kupari. No, he would not be playing elevated minutes, but the Jets are kind of starting to run a little bit thin on guys that they can ask to man that space. And so this is where I think, you're talking about the marriage of the new and the old. And if the Jets really go for a big center, obviously, you're going to have to trade some assets, but you could land maybe a Horvat. I could also see them trying for like a stopgap solution, maybe a Pajot. Maybe they try and see if Claude Giroux is, who's basically like a free agent here pretty soon. If he wants to play down the middle, he's been a winger for the past several years. He's settled at home in Ottawa. Can't imagine him really wanting to come to Winnipeg. But the Jets are just going to have to get creative, right? They need center help. They need to find a way to really improve the scoring potential down the middle. And they just need somebody that can really boost this middle six so that when you add those ELCs, they're not asked to do all the heavy lifting. They are supplementing a great core that is already in place. Where I do worry a little bit is because the Jets are going to have some pretty big departures and guys like Ehlers, I don't know how they intend to replace that. If their solution is to give Brad Lambert that ice time, okay, I guess. Lambert looked a little more comfortable in his latest NHL stint, but he's not going to replace Ehlers. He's just not. That's not his game. I don't really feel like that's a fair expectation from him. Maybe he's getting up to that point towards the end of the season or next year, but for most of the season, I can't really see that being the case. So the Jets have some very big holes to fill. And I honestly have looked at this to the point where the Jets need to make at least two trades. I don't think that there's any way for them to avoid this. Either they go for a big trade and some sort of free agent signing, or they try to do two trades. If they only do one trade and only bring in one top six forward, I think that's a mistake. I know that that's kind of crazy to say when we're talking about a team like this, but honestly, the Jets really need that much help. The upcoming Kyle Connor situation that we have really not talked about probably holds one of the biggest franchise-defining departures in recent memory, and we're already dealing one this offseason with Ehlers. If Connor goes too, this team is going to look totally different, and I just don't really know what Winnipeg's plan is. I would imagine KFC comes back, but he also is asking for likely a ton of money. And I don't know if the Jets are relatively willing to do the bonus structure and the sort of contract structure that he's going to ask for. So there are so many big decisions over the next season and into the following season that really loom for this franchise. And I really feel like it's time for the Jets to get back to brass tacks. I've talked about the importance of actually making use of your draft and develop model. It's never been more apparent than right now. This team is at a turning point for the franchise, and it can go a couple of different ways. They can either double down on what they already have, and I don't think that that's the right choice. They've already done that. It hasn't worked for the past couple of years. It's gotten better, but it hasn't worked. And I think it's not going to work if they keep doing it year over year. They have to change the approach. There's no other choice. Hellebuck has, maybe shown that he's not the most trustworthy in the postseason. He rallied in the Dallas series, but, you don't want to make him the only reason that you're successful in the playoffs. You have got to find other ways to supplement this offense and give them some real scoring punch. Even if Hellebuck was perfect throughout this postseason, I don't know that the outcome would have been that much different. So, this team really needs help. They need scoring, and it's time for both internal and external help. But I am curious to know what you think is going to be the solution here. We've talked in the past about players the Jets could trade for, and the reality of the market is it's a little thin for what the Jets need. There are lots of centers out there with term. I just worry about the kind of guys that the Jets are going to go for. Given Winnipeg's trade deadline this past summer or this past March, I do worry a little bit. Their pro scouting and their prospect scouting, two very different worlds. The pro scouting consistently just makes me very frightened about what they're watching, because when they bring in these guys, some of them have been better than others, but there are some real duds the Jets have acquired over the years, and I hope that doesn't color their entire summer. This sounds a little bit dour, and I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but I think we all understand to some degree that the Jets can be creatures of habit, and that's why I am asking them to think outside the box and go deep and go long. This could be a big Hail Mary summer. This could really define the franchise's next several years, and I still have a lot of hope that the Jets, with their backs against the wall, do their best work. It's where they've found success before. They've managed to get themselves out of the fire, and I am hoping that they have at least one more magic trick here with some surprise trade, some surprise acquisition that none of us sees coming, but that fits exactly what Winnipeg needs heading into this upcoming season. But curious to know if you think there's a center out there who really fits that bill. How many players do you think the Jets need to acquire outside of, their internal reinforcements? I'm at 2 right now. I think 2 players, 2 top 6 forwards at a minimum. I think that's just the reality of where this team is. And it also kind of feeds into where they were also vulnerable before the Ehlers departures. So lots and lots to really consider. But there is one X factor amidst all of this that I haven't really touched on, and it's Brayden Yager. I think that there's a real chance that Yager does enough in preseason and camp to start earning himself a real shot at making the Jets lineup this coming season. We'll chat about the odds of this and how it might impact Winnipeg's offseason plans in one brief moment. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we are chatting a little bit about Brayden Yager and sort of the Yager bomb factor that we haven't really touched on because in a lot of ways it's distant in the future. And we know how the Jets are with their prospects. They don't play them. Cole Perfetti, Dylan Sandberg, you had some Brad Lambert and Nikita Shibrikov stints. But of those four, only two of them are still here. The other two got sent down, and you can debate whether that was the right decision with Shibrikov especially. But I think the reality is the Jets have this desire to really make the Moose a marination zone. And when the Moose are this bad, to me, it's just not worth it. The AHL is not even that great of a development league. I think a lot of people will assume it is, but what you learn down there isn't really the kind of hockey that's necessarily going to translate to a lot of NHL success. If you're doing really well down there, it can be a really good sign, but it's not the biggest sign of skill and what you want to do. The AHL, I think, is better for setting pro habits on and off the ice in other ways. I just don't see it as a development league. And for that reason, Brayden Yager might honestly be better served playing with the Jets. He has a defensive maturity to his game and a lot of skill that I don't think many other prospects his age come into the league carrying. And last camp and preseason, I felt like he was a lot closer than I expected. Yes, his progress this season in the juniors wasn't like insane, but I just feel like I'm not so worried about that. I feel like he is going to start to find pro level success almost immediately. I just question whether it's going to be with the Jets or the Moose. I honestly think it might be time to see if he can come to the Jets and do a job. If he really can't, and if your stint to start the season goes really poorly, then demote him, right? You have the ability to send him down and start with the Moose for the rest of the season. I just had this sneaking suspicion, though, that he's going to really upset the whole balance and actually look pretty darn good coming out of camp. I don't feel like he's going to be physically overmatched. He's not a super small player, and I feel like he has a level of acumen and maturity to his game that, again, a lot of other prospects just don't. And it also does mean in some ways that he's a little closer to a finished product than I think some other players are. I don't know that he has the most insane upside, but if you're looking for a guy who can boost your bottom six with some real offensive talent and two-way skill, especially while Lowry is ailing, this might be a way to do it. And it also means that you don't have to bring in an external source. Now, look, I'm still saying the Jets need a top six center, maybe two top six forwards, period. That has not changed. But I think for the bottom or even the middle six rotation, the Jets need to find more options. Nemesnikov, guys like that, they're just not able to carry that load. I think Vlad has done it about as much as you could ask him to do, but in reality, he's a fourth liner being asked to be a 2C. That's really not sustainable. The Jets have to find other options, whether outside or inside, and if it's inside, maybe you look at a guy who has already shown in camp that he might just be ready to take on a bigger pro role. I feel a little more confident that he's going to find immediate pro success than I do with Lambert in some ways. I think Brad is one of those players where I still need to see something with him in terms of his assertiveness at the NHL level. And once he starts to get that confidence, I think the rest will start to fall into place. But it's going to take him a little more time. With Yager, I think because his floor is higher, even if his ceiling is maybe lower, he's going to be sort of a plug-in and kind of play player. I think he'll fit in quite nicely with the Jets. I really don't worry about him too much becoming an integral part of this team in the future. And if he does really do well, this coming summer in preseason, does he sort of become Winnipeg's 2C in the near future? I think the Jets are probably projecting that. Maybe that also plays into how they try to approach the term question, because we've talked a lot about the Jets going for centers with term. Maybe they want to do a short-term stopgap. Maybe they're looking at a Nick Schmaltz or somebody of that caliber who's kind of in that middle tier of player. Somebody who's got a year or two left, who's maybe not going to be your world-burning, most impressive center, but who can do a really good job for you while you wait for one of your top prospects to really start to turn heads and become something special. Outside of that, the Jets just don't really have too many other options. If they pay up, that changes the equation quite a bit. But if they don't, well, yeah, you really need to get creative then. I look at Utah as a team that could very much be a great trading partner. I look at a guy like Barrett Hayton or Lawson Krause or Nick Schmaltz. There are very clear upgrades in different positions for the Jets to look at there. But again, Brayden Yager might be one of their easier internal solutions. We already have a pretty good idea that Chibrikov is going to make the team. I don't think that's really a question. If Appleton walks, that's like the easiest, plug in and play kind of spot possible. The center position, a lot harder to figure out. The Ehlers position, also really hard to figure out. This is where, I wish the Jets hadn't put themselves in this position to begin with. This really needed to be the Stanley Cup season. It's fallen a bit short, and now the Jets have some very difficult realities to contend with. But the good news is they've gotten better at drafting. They're still pretty good at making trades when they have a lot of trouble on the horizon, and they've managed to get themselves out of some real big situations that I honestly didn't think the Jets would be able to, much less other teams. Winnipeg has lots of unique challenges, and still the front office has managed to escape with nary a scratch in a lot of these instances. So with that in mind, obviously, I want to know how you would navigate this coming summer. Do you think Yager's going to be ready for that next step? Do you feel that he should be given a real NHL shot, or do you feel like the Jets are going to do their old standby and stick him with the Moose? Do you agree with that plan? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Later this week, we'll probably chat a little bit about the Sandberg extension, how likely it is that we're going to see some deals announced over the next few weeks. A lot of other teams are making their moves. The Jets still remain relatively quiet. So a lot to consider, a lot to discuss, but of course, we will be there every step of the way. For tonight's show, though, I thank you so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.